Let's take you live to this now. The Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, in KZN. Let's take you there live.
So to settle down as soon as possible. Where we can't settle them down, we'll have to, and the MEC also had very good plans. We'll send them to neighboring schools. We'll keep them at centers. But for now, we're assessing what the damages are, what is possible under the circumstances, and what we need to do where we are unable to really send kids back to school for a normal learning. So MEC, because I was getting the briefing from my colleague, and with him agreeing what the province is going to do, what we're going to do is national, now that it's a national disaster, what I have to do with my colleagues nationally, but in the main make sure that ourselves as a sector, the province and DBE work together, and then we can mobilize other sectors. As I say, I was glad that the president declared it a national disaster so that we can all bring our resources together. We'll be bringing professional teams from the Department of Basic Education. Our engineers will come and work with the engineers. We will bring whatever resources we have, books, as the principal is explaining that urgently, if you want them to go back to school, the books have all been destroyed. So we'll be really prioritizing, saying what is that we can do immediately, because we want schools to come back immediately.
And those 101 schools that you understand are inaccessible at this stage, what are the plans around that and the learners impacted just by even the infrastructure itself?
What I will be going there tomorrow, what I understand from the MEC, they are inaccessible for other learners, not for all learners. So the other learners who are staying that other side of the school, they'll be able to go to school. But the other learners from the other side of the damage or the flood, they're not able to go to school. So what we are working on is to differentiate, to say who of the learners from those 101 schools is unable to go to school. Where are they? What is it that we can do? That's where my discussions with the Minister of Communication comes in, to say what is that we do with those learners. Obviously we have to do remote, but what are the possibilities, what are the resources? And she expects a response from me to say, in this area it's primary school kids, it will be difficult to do remote, but there are these resources which are available. In this area it's older kids, if we give them tablets, they'll be able to work on their own. And that's the detail we are working on until Friday is our deadline. So we need to work on the detail.
We understand 124 schools have been extensively damaged. Do you have an idea in terms of how much it will cost the Department of Education in getting back those schools into learning?
Engineer, because they were... MEC will help me also in those schools.
Will understand, maybe be able to touch on this. 124 schools extensively damaged. Do you know how much money it will cost to get them up and running? And for example, this school that we're in doesn't have textbooks that have been flooded. What are the plans, MEC?
Well, the preliminary figure stands at 442 million. And that's only released to infrastructure. As you can see in this school, a lot of things have been damaged. Literally, the only thing that you can find in the schools are teachers and learners. But in terms of teacher support material and other equipments, it's gone, completely gone. So we are quantifying those damages now. So definitely the figure will go up. That's what we're expecting from now on. That's why we said all our schools will open today. But we're mindful of the fact that not all schools can commence with teaching and learning. But it was important for all of them to open so that we can start quantifying the damage that has been done, but also getting exact numbers of how many teachers are affected, how many learners are affected, so that our decisions going forward are based on credible and verified information.
Have you been able to remove those people that were left destitute and was housed in the various schools as temporary shelter? Are those schools open currently?
Those schools are open. There were only two schools in an area of Amawoti last night where we could not move the displaced people. But we were assured by the municipalities that they will be moved as early as possible today, so that at least tomorrow we can start with teaching and learning in those schools, because at least those schools are not affected. That is why they were occupied by people who were displaced from their homes. So by end of today, all those schools that were occupied by displaced learners will be freed, and by tomorrow we'll be starting with teaching and learning.
Okay. Just one more, Minister Pilan Bahari from Newsroom Africa. The issue now around young people who don't have homes at this current stage? Do you perhaps have an indication? Have they been able to come forward to say we currently don't have even homes to sleep at, and it might even be difficult for us to even come to school? Any aid as far as the department there?
No, in that discussions, we've also reflected on other challenges beyond just coming to school, uniforms. But as you say, displaced kids who often lost parents, kids who are on their own there. And that's where the province has put in place a psychosocial service program, which is going to be led by social development. They will guide us and tell us in our centers we have this child who's displaced, because we were not able to access our kids. We'll only get reports from those centers which are not necessarily run by us, but they'll give us information. But in the meantime, the province is putting together a plan for psychosocial support to say if there are young kids. I mean, the Secretary for SAT was saying they've been to those camps. They find kids who are just playing. Some of them have lost their parents, some are just displaced. So we'll only be able to get the full information from social development, and we'll work with them on how we really support our learners. But we'll get more sense when they come back to school to say which of the learners really lost parents, lost everything, or they're displaced, they're not with their parents, and we'll only get it back. That's why for us it's important that they must come back to school, because it will help us to unravel some of the challenges that I think are located elsewhere, not in our schools. So it's important for them to return so that we can sort things out from the school.
And what happens in the interim, Minister, given that you have more than 200 schools, some can't be accessed, some have been destroyed by the floods? What happens to those learners in the interim, given that you're still making the plans for provisions? What happens to them now?
No, you see, for instance, what they're doing here, they're clearing. So we will be able to say which schools by Friday will not be able to operate. So that those that are seriously damaged, the MEC told me that they've already requested neighboring schools to accommodate learners who are not necessarily from their schools to make sure that we minimize the number. So only after we've given ourselves 2 days from today, we will have a sense to say how many learners were we unable to redirect them to other schools. They are reopening schools which were not working. So after 2 days, we are saying by Friday we'll have a clear picture as to how many learners are we unable to place at neighboring schools or the newly reopened schools, or are able to, as the parents are doing here, to clean and do the minimum they can do to just get learning and teaching going. So we'll have a better picture, I think, by Friday, and we'll said on Monday we'll announce.
Okay, Minister, perhaps here, yesterday I attended an event at Kwaduza area in the Ilembe, where the Deputy Minister of Social Development was calling on the school principals to compile a list of school children who were affected by the floods so that they can buy uniform. Are you also involved in that?
Yeah, we're working together as department. You see, before even the president announced, we had to meet as ministers under COGTA to demarcate the different areas we'll be working with and agree that we're going to work in a very integrated manner. So we have an ops center, so they're going to take that information to the center, and amongst ourselves as ministers and departments and provinces, we're going to say how many kids have not had uniform, how many kids need clothing, how many kids even need when they resettle them. Because some of the kids are on their own, you can't go and resettle them the way you will resettle adults. And only on that basis, when we exchange information with social development, we'll be able to support each other. So we work together as departments and as government. So our information will complement each other.
Just lastly, do you have an idea how many learners have been impacted by the floods?
So far, our estimate stands at about 320,000 learners that have been affected. But obviously, as schools open today and in the coming days, that's where we'll be able to verify those figures. That is why it was important for us to open the school so that we get this information and we act on the basis of that information. But judging from the schools that were affected, the 630 schools, judging from the enrollment in those schools, the figure was stating at about 320,000.
Okay, colleagues, let's proceed. We're still going to another school.
That's the Minister of Education, Angie Motshekga, briefing the media about the state of affairs in KwaZulu-Natal in terms of the education sector that has been severely impacted by the floods that took place last Monday. As you are going to do a walkabout in some of these schools that were affected by the floods. As you can see, the extent of the damage is very huge, with Education MEC saying that about 442 million rand that will be set aside in order to rebuild the infrastructure of the school that has been lost as a result of the floods. Let's talk to the MEC now, MEC for Education in KwaZulu-Natal. Perhaps any word that you can extend to the communities around schools that have been damaged by the floods?
What we have decided as Department of Education is that we must open all our schools, because there is information that we need, one, to really quantify the extent of damage that has been suffered. But also you will understand that the disruption is not only in relation to infrastructure, it's in relation to kids themselves who have lost almost everything, the educators themselves. But as we could have seen in these schools, literally all that is left is educators and learners. All teacher support material was washed away. The computers and all the systems that they have put in place in relation to technology has been washed away. So basically we really have to start from the ground in terms of repurposing the school, including furniture and things like that. So that is why it was important that we open our schools today. We are mindful of the fact that teaching and learning may not start effectively in some of these schools because of the challenges like this ones. There is no effective learning today, but we need to know exactly how many learners are affected. The figures that we worked on based on the enrollment of the 630 schools that are affected stands at 320,000 learners that are affected. But we need to verify those figures. We can only verify them by learners presenting themselves to schools. We are also mindful of the fact that there will be learners who will not come at all because they literally lost everything. They lost their parents, they lost their homes. They are currently sheltered in community halls and other government institutions. That is why the provincial government has actually summoned all senior managers of government in this province to go to these people and start collecting information. So we're expecting that in the coming days we will then be speaking with certainty in terms of numbers.
In terms of the learners, we were speaking to the matric learners who are saying that they've lost everything that were stored, that were kept here at the schools, the school projects. What will be the plan there, because the mid-year exams are fast approaching?
Well, we'll have to act with speed in terms of procuring all these things that have been lost. We are correct that we're losing more time. In a meeting with the minister, we have agreed that by Friday we must give the national minister a consolidated and specific information of what has been lost in each and every school, together with the figures which will be needed to procure these things, so that at least by next week we start procuring all these things that are necessary for teaching and learning. We'll also have to rework in terms of our timetabling so that we recover the time lost, because you will recall that we closed some of the schools, about 500 of them, 2 days prior to the long weekend, the Easter holidays. And now those schools, some of them again are unable to begin with effective teaching and learning because they have lost everything which we need to procure for teaching and learning to really resume in earnest.
Yes, there's Kwazi Mshengu, the MEC for Education in KwaZulu-Natal, saying that more than 300,000 learners have been affected as a result of the floods, and also they will have to set aside about 442 million rand in order to restore the kind of infrastructure that has been lost as a result of the floods. As you know, that more than 630 schools were affected, and 101 of them are currently not accessible by the schools, by these learners, but saying that the MEC that it was very important for the learners to go to school so that they can be able to see how the damage was, so that they can be able to quantify many things as to how they will then react and respond to the challenges that are currently seen in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. Well, the MEC is here with Angie Motshekga, the Minister of Education Education, who is here assessing the impact of the damage here in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, which was the hardest hit, especially in Durban, which remains the hardest hit area alongside KwaDukuza, which is the second most hardest hit area, with 30 people having been killed by the floods in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. With that, it's back to you for now.
Vusikhumalo, thank you so much for updating us on this story. The Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, in the province to do assessment work, and that reminder by the MEC for Education in KwaZulu-Natal that although children are going back to school, they might not immediately be getting back to their school work, as more assessment work is being done in the aftermath of those floods last week.